In the early 1980s, Debra Winger wasn't just a rising star. She was widely regarded as the most electrifying young actress in Hollywood. In a remarkably short span of time, she shared the screen with John Travolta, Richard Gere, and Shirley MacLaine, earning 2 Oscar nominations before the age of 30. Critics praised her as fearless and instinctive, capable of shifting from aching vulnerability to unshakable strength in a single moment. Then, at the peak of her success, she did something no one expected. Disillusioned by Hollywood and the way it treated women, Winger quietly stepped away. Her sudden absence sparked years of speculation, turning her retreat into a Hollywood mystery, one so compelling it would later inspire the documentary Searching for Debra Winger. Mary Debra Winger was born on May 16, 1955, in Cleveland Heights, Ohio, into a modest Jewish family. Her father, Robert, worked as a meat packer, while her mother, Ruth, was an office manager. When Debra was still young, the family relocated to California, settling in the San Fernando Valley, an early move that would quietly set the stage for an unexpected future. Winger's path toward acting was anything but planned. She enrolled at California State University, Northridge, studying criminology and sociology, but never completed her degree. At just 18, she traveled to Israel on what she later described as a typical youth tour, which included time spent visiting a kibbutz. Over the years, she occasionally embellished the story in interviews, at times suggesting she had trained with the Israeli Defense Forces, before later clarifying that it had simply been a standard tour. After returning to the United States, a sudden and life-altering event changed everything. Debra fell from the back of a truck and suffered a cerebral hemorrhage, a traumatic moment that would become a turning point in her life and, ultimately, the beginning of a very different journey. The injury was devastating. For nearly 10 months, Debra Winger was left partially paralyzed and unable to see, with doctors warning her that her eyesight might never return. Trapped in darkness, she had nothing but time to question her future and imagine a different life. It was during those long months of recovery that a life-changing decision took shape. If she survived and healed, she promised herself she would move to California and become an actress. It wasn't a childhood ambition, but a revelation born directly from trauma and uncertainty. When her vision slowly returned and she regained the ability to walk, Debra honored that promise. She relocated to Los Angeles and began auditioning, landing small, easily overlooked roles that did little to hint at what was coming. In 1976, she appeared in the low-budget film Slumber Party 57, a project that quickly faded into obscurity. Her first real visibility came soon after, with a 3-episode arc on the television series Wonder Woman. Cast as Drusilla, Wonder Girl, the younger sister of Linda Carter's Diana Prince, Winger suddenly had momentum. The producers even offered her a recurring role. Surprisingly, she declined. Fearing typecasting and unwilling to be trapped in a single character before her career truly began, she walked away. Years later, she would jokingly revisit that decision on Late Night with David Letterman, appearing in her full Wonder Girl costume and openly mocking her own brief superhero phase. In 1978, she appeared in Thank God It's Friday, a disco-themed comedy designed to ride the wave of Saturday Night Fever. The film itself made little impact, but Debra Winger no longer went unnoticed. Something was starting to change. Casting directors began to notice that Debra Winger carried something rare, an intensity, a quiet defiance, and a clear refusal to play it safe. She didn't fit the mold of traditional Hollywood beauty, and that was precisely her power. She felt real, grounded, and unpredictable. After early appearances in projects like Breaking Through, the turning point arrived in 1980 with a role that would redefine her career. Director James Bridges was preparing Urban Cowboy, a film centered on Texas oil workers who spent their nights at Gilley's, the legendary Pasadena honky-tonk where mechanical bull riding became a rite of passage. John Travolta was already cast as the lead, while the female role had first been offered to Sissy Spacek, who declined. Debra auditioned against another rising newcomer, Michelle Pfeiffer, and it was Winger who won the part. On screen, she portrayed a fiercely independent young woman who falls for Travolta's bud, marries him impulsively, and then flatly refuses to live under his control. The character wasn't submissive or sentimental. She was defiant, complicated, and unapologetically herself. One of the film's most iconic moments demanded more than acting. Debra insisted on riding the mechanical bull herself, training for weeks rather than relying on a stunt double. When the scene finally unfolds, she isn't simply staying on the bull, she's making a statement. There's a visible mix of triumph and quiet sorrow in her expression, a wordless message to Bud that she will not be diminished or tamed. That single moment captured her essence and helped turn Debra Winger into a star. Urban Cowboy quickly became a cultural phenomenon, earning more than $53 million at the domestic box office. Debra Winger's performance stood out immediately, bringing her 2 Golden Globe nominations, one for Best Supporting Actress and another for Best New Star of the Year, along with a BAFTA nomination. Critics repeatedly noted that she had transformed what could have been a simple, stereotypical role into a layered and emotionally complex character. Behind the scenes, however, the success came with tension. Director James Bridges later revealed that he and Debra had a major confrontation during filming. At one point, she flatly refused to perform a scene, forcing the production to shut down for an entire day. Bridges was furious at the time, but when he revisited the scene, he realized Debra's instincts were right. The dialogue simply didn't work. Her resistance wasn't ego, it was conviction. That moment set the tone for how Debra Winger would be perceived throughout her career. She was deeply invested in the craft, uncompromising when something felt wrong. To some, this was the mark of a serious professional. To others, it earned her the unfair label of being difficult. As Debra herself once put it, that's just the job. This whole obsession with celebrity is very confusing. In 1982, she appeared in 2 films. The first, Cannery Row, adapted from the John Steinbeck novel and co-starring Nick Nolte, was plagued with problems from the beginning. Raquel Welch was fired after only 8 days of filming, and the movie ultimately failed at the box office. But any disappointment was immediately eclipsed by her next project. An Officer and a Gentleman told the story of Zach Mayo, a naval aviation officer candidate portrayed by Richard Gere, and Paula Pokrivki, a factory worker brought to life by Debra Winger. The film's unforgettable final scene, with Gere in full dress uniform lifting Debra into his arms and carrying her out of the factory, became one of the most iconic romantic images in cinema history, sealing her place as a Hollywood star. Yet behind the camera, An Officer and a Gentleman was anything but romantic. The set was charged with conflict, especially between Debra Winger and director Taylor Hackford. Debra bristled at what she saw as his controlling nature and his dismissal of her creative input. Years later, she would openly describe Hackford as one of the worst directors she had ever worked with. Hackford, in turn, viewed Debra as confrontational and unwilling to bend, convinced she pushed back too hard against authority. The tension didn't end there. According to co-star Louis Gossett Jr., who would go on to win an Academy Award for his role as Sergeant Emile Foley, the electric chemistry between Debra and Richard Gere existed only on screen. Off-camera, they barely tolerated each other. Their dislike was so intense that filming their romantic scenes became a struggle, with the hostility between them lingering in the air. Debra later likened Gere to a brick wall, while Gere told interviewers he found her erratic and difficult to work with. The rift lasted for years, with the two avoiding contact long after filming ended. When it came time to promote the movie, Debra refused to participate. She had no interest in pretending everything had been harmonious when it clearly hadn't been. Despite the chaos behind the scenes, the film triumphed. An Officer and a Gentleman earned more than $130 million domestically, received multiple Academy Award nominations, and secured Debra Winger a Best Actress nomination. At just 27 years old, she was officially recognized as one of Hollywood's finest talents. Then, almost unexpectedly, she made an unusual choice, lending her voice to E.T. the Extraterrestrial, stepping quietly into one of the most iconic films of the era in a way few people realized. Debra Winger's voice, low, husky, and unmistakable, was quietly woven into the sound design that gave E.T. the Extraterrestrial his iconic voice. It was an uncredited role, done as a favor to Steven Spielberg, and remains one of the strangest footnotes in her career. But that brief detour was only a prelude to what many consider the absolute peak of her acting life. In 1983, Winger delivered what is often regarded as her finest performance in terms of Endearment, directed by James L. Brooks. The film centered on Emma Greenway and her emotionally tangled relationship with her overbearing mother, Aurora, played by Shirley MacLaine. Jack Nicholson appeared as Aurora's flirtatious astronaut neighbor, while Deborah took on the demanding role of Emma, a woman determined to live on her own terms while still yearning for her mother's love. The performance required her to age convincingly from her 20s into her late 30s, tracing an entire adult life on screen. Emma's journey was brutal in its honesty. She marries against her mother's wishes, raises children, endures her husband's betrayal, and ultimately confronts a terminal cancer diagnosis. The role demanded everything emotionally, and Deborah gave it without restraint. Yet, as had become a familiar pattern, tension followed her onto the set. Deborah and Shirley MacLaine clashed almost immediately. By 1983, MacLaine was Hollywood royalty, a veteran actress who had already endured 4 Oscar losses and now stepped into a role seemingly written just for her. She carried herself with the authority of someone who had waited decades for this moment. Deborah, by contrast, was only 28 years old, already facing her second Oscar nomination, and brimming with ideas about how Emma should be portrayed. Two powerful forces, at very different stages of their careers, were on a collision course. Debra Winger never quietly accepted decisions she didn't believe in. She questioned creative choices, challenged direction, and refused to automatically defer to seniority. Even her first meeting with Shirley MacLaine symbolized the divide between them. MacLaine arrived wrapped in luxurious fur coats, the image of classic Hollywood prestige. Deborah showed up in combat boots and a miniskirt, raw, modern, and deliberately unpolished. They weren't just different personalities. They represented two entirely different generations and philosophies of acting. As filming continued, the tension only grew. When award season arrived, both women were nominated for Best Actress, and the media eagerly framed it as a showdown. Mother versus daughter, old Hollywood versus the new. When MacLaine won, her acceptance speech included the now infamous line, "I deserve this." Many interpreted it as a pointed jab at Deborah, though MacLaine later insisted it wasn't meant that way. Despite the drama, Terms of Endearment was a triumph. The film won 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Actress for MacLaine. Deborah took home the National Society of Film Critics Award for Best Actress, but once again, the Oscar eluded her. By just 28 years old, with 2 nominations and no wins, she was already gaining a reputation, not only as an exceptional talent, but as someone labeled difficult. Fair or not, that perception would shadow her career. The late 1980s brought more work, but fewer victories. In 1986, Deborah starred opposite Robert Redford in Legal Eagles, a film that was poorly received. Her public criticism of director Ivan Reitman, whom she called the second worst director she had ever worked with, further strained her standing in the industry. Films like Made in Heaven and Black Widow, both released in 1987, failed to connect with audiences. During this period, Deborah also turned down several roles that would later become iconic. She passed on Fatal Attraction, which went to Glenn Close and became a massive hit. She declined Bull Durham, a decision that helped launch Susan Sarandon to stardom. Most famously, she dropped out of A League of Their Own. Officially, it was cited as creative differences. The real reason, as Deborah later admitted, was simple. She refused to work with Madonna, whom she did not consider a serious actress. Geena Davis replaced her, and the film went on to become a beloved classic. There was also Peggy Sue Got Married. Deborah had been cast opposite Nicolas Cage in Francis Ford Coppola's time travel romance, only to suffer a serious back injury in a bicycle accident just before production began. Forced to withdraw, she watched as Kathleen Turner stepped into the role and earned an Oscar nomination. The pattern was unmistakable. Debra Winger had strong opinions about directors, co-stars, and scripts, and she wasn't afraid to voice them. In Hollywood, especially for women, that kind of honesty often came at a steep price. In a 1986 interview with Barbara Walters, Bette Davis remarked that she recognized much of herself in Debra Winger, an actress branded difficult not because of ego, but because she cared deeply about the work. The comparison was insightful, yet it did little to change reality. Once the label took hold, it proved impossible to shake. Casting directors grew cautious. Directors avoided the perceived trouble. Gradually, the roles offered to Debra became fewer and less compelling. Then, in 1993, she reminded everyone of her extraordinary talent with Shadowlands. Playing Joy Davidman, the sharp-minded American poet who would become the wife of C.S. Lewis, Debra earned her third Academy Award nomination. Opposite Anthony Hopkins, she portrayed a woman of intelligence and fierce independence, adopting a clipped New York accent and challenging Lewis's views on faith, love, and suffering. The film traced their unlikely romance and her eventual death from cancer, and Debra's performance reignited critical admiration for her craft. She was once again nominated for Best Actress, and once again, she lost, this time to Holly Hunter for The Piano. 3 nominations, no wins. At 38, Debra was already feeling the industry pull away. That same year, she received a Golden Globe nomination for A Dangerous Woman, portraying a mentally impaired woman navigating intimacy and independence. The role showcased her range and her ability to completely disappear into a character, but the film received only a limited release and passed largely unnoticed. In 1995, she appeared in Forget Paris opposite Billy Crystal, a light romantic comedy about a relationship enduring life's unpredictability. It was gentle and charming, and quickly forgotten. More significantly, it marked the end of an era. For the next 6 years, Debra Winger would make no films at all. The decision came suddenly while she was in Ireland. Standing on a roadside, she turned to her boyfriend at the time, actor Arliss Howard, and said simply, "That's it. I'm done." She was 40 years old, worn down after nearly 2 decades in the industry. Later, she would explain that the choice had been building for years. In an interview with People magazine, Debra admitted she had wanted out for a long time. The roles no longer inspired her. She felt she had already lived those stories, already felt those emotions. And so, at the height of her reputation and exhaustion, Debra Winger walked away. Debra Winger didn't step away from Hollywood out of bitterness. She stepped away because she needed to be challenged, and the industry was no longer offering her anything that felt alive. At the same time, motherhood had become central to her identity. Her son Noah, from her first marriage to actor Timothy Hutton, later told the New York Times that his mother was deeply thoughtful and present as a parent, and that it was difficult for her to give her work the level of devotion it demanded while raising young children. To Debra, being a mother mattered too much to do it halfway, and she knew she couldn't fully commit to both roles at once. When asked why she became an actress in the first place, her answer was disarmingly simple. "It was an accident," she once said. "I didn't plan on it." In 1996, Debra married actor Arliss Howard, whom she had met on the set of Wilder Napalm. They later welcomed a son, Gideon Babe, and in 1997 Debra also became stepmother to Howard's son, Sam, from a previous marriage. The family chose to settle in New York City, deliberately placing distance between themselves and Hollywood. During her years away from film, Debra was far from idle. She returned to the stage, spent a semester as a teaching fellow at Harvard University, and devoted time to environmental causes and charitable work. Most importantly, she raised her children. Her absence from the screen became a cultural question mark, a mystery that fascinated both fans and the industry. That mystery took center stage in 2002, when Rosanna Arquette released the documentary Searching for Debra Winger. The film explored the harsh realities facing actresses over 40, featuring candid interviews about ageism and sexism in Hollywood. Debra herself appeared at the end, engaging in an honest conversation with Arquette about creativity, relevance, and the difficult choices women are forced to make. The message was clear. Hollywood didn't know what to do with talented women once they reached middle age. Debra had simply chosen to leave before the industry could discard her. Her return came quietly. In 2001, she reappeared in Big Bad Love, a small independent film written and directed by her husband, Arliss Howard. There was no grand comeback, no studio hype, only work done on her own terms. Over the following years, she appeared in a series of modest projects. Radio, 2003, reunited her with Cuba Gooding Jr. in a feel-good sports drama that failed to impress critics. Eulogy, 2004, a dark comedy, quickly faded from view. In 2005, Sometimes in April tackled the Rwandan genocide, earning strong reviews but limited distribution. Then, in 2008, Debra delivered one of her most quietly powerful performances in Rachel Getting Married, directed by Jonathan Demme. Playing a mother at the emotional center of a fractured family, she once again reminded audiences of the depth, restraint, and emotional truth that had always set her apart. In Rachel Getting Married, Anne Hathaway took on the role of the troubled daughter, while Debra Winger infused the mother with quiet devastation, a woman carrying years of regret for the ways she had failed her children. The film was met with critical acclaim, earning Hathaway an Academy Award nomination. Debra was not nominated, but her performance served as a powerful reminder of what audiences had been missing all along. This was the same actress who had defined a generation in the 1980s, still capable of raw, unsparing emotional truth. In 2012, Debra made her long-awaited Broadway debut in David Mamet's The Anarchist, starring opposite Patti LuPone. The two-character drama struggled with critics and audiences alike, closing after just 17 performances. Even so, Debra demonstrated that her presence and authority extended beyond film, proving she could command the stage as confidently as the screen. Then came a surprising turn. In 2016, Debra joined the cast of The Ranch, a Netflix sitcom alongside Ashton Kutcher, Sam Elliott, and Danny Masterson. It was exactly the kind of laugh-track comedy many assumed she would never touch. Yet Debra explained to Entertainment Tonight that she accepted the role for a simple reason. She had never done a traditional sitcom before, and she wanted the challenge. The series ran for 4 seasons, providing her with steady work and introducing her to an entirely new generation of viewers. By this stage of her life, Debra openly acknowledged how much she had changed. "I'm sort of a strange mix," she once said. "I think I used to be more romantic. I'm probably more of a realist now." That evolution was reflected in The Lovers, 2017, a romantic comedy about a long-married couple trapped in a failing relationship who slowly find their way back to each other. It marked her first romantic lead in 22 years. At 62, Debra was once again portraying complex, flawed adults, and reminding audiences why she had always been so compelling. With time came perspective. Old grudges softened. In 2011, she presented an award to Richard Gere, the two sharing a gracious moment far removed from their earlier animosity. In 2017, she spoke with warmth about Taylor Hackford, acknowledging that despite their clashes during An Officer and a Gentleman, the film had been pivotal for both of their careers. The feuds that once defined much of her reputation slowly faded, replaced by reflection, balance, and a quieter confidence. As the stories about her being difficult slowly faded into the background, what remained was something far more lasting: Debra Winger's legacy. She never won an Academy Award. 3 nominations, 3 losses. Yet her influence on cinema can't be measured by trophies alone. In the 1980s, she embodied a different kind of female presence on screen. She earned 3 Oscar nominations before turning 40, walked away at the peak of her fame when the work no longer challenged her and her family mattered more, and returned later on her own terms, choosing curiosity over celebrity. She never won an Oscar. She never became the kind of Hollywood legend honored with endless retrospectives and lifetime awards. But she lived authentically, made work that mattered, and proved there is more than one way to define success in Hollywood. The true lesson of Debra Winger's story isn't about fame or accolades. It's about knowing what you value, and having the courage to choose it, even when the world insists you're wrong. Sometimes the bravest thing an actress can do isn't staying in the spotlight, but stepping away from it, returning only when there's something worth saying. That is what really happened to Debra Winger. She chose herself, and that choice, more than any trophy, defines her legacy.